There was a moment in the mid-'80s when adult filmmakers decided that mature cinema didn't have to stay in bedrooms or dingy apartments. If Hollywood could sell adventure, why couldn't they try too? Surrender in Paradise, released in 1985, was born out of that moment, a strange, sun-bleached experiment where a handful of the industry's biggest names were dropped onto a tropical island and told to survive, seduce, and somehow hold a plot together. This is the story of how it all came to be. The film, credited to David Frazer and Svetlana Mishoff, sits in that odd pocket of adult cinema where ambition outran practicality. Frazer provided the script and a loose directorial vision, but Svetlana's presence behind the camera was far more than ceremonial. With films such as 800 Fantasy Lane and Sex Boat already forming part of her filmography, she had a calculated sense of how to shape a scene, how to pace erotic storytelling, and how to keep a production moving when it threatened to stall. The premise is gloriously pulpy, however. A plane goes down somewhere in the South Seas, leaving a mismatched group of survivors stranded on an uncharted island. Among them, Jerry Butler, cast as a convict whose chains are broken by catastrophe rather than redemption, and a cluster of women played by arguably some of the most popular stars of the 1980s. Ginger Lynn, Stacey Donovan, Lois Ayres, Renee Tiffany, Diva, and Crystal Holland, all key fixtures of mid-'80s adult cinema, are stranded on the island alongside Butler. It's the kind of ensemble that could have anchored a dozen different movies, but here they're all funneled into a single, sun-drenched fantasy about survival, fear, and desire. Well, those themes remain mostly unexplored, and the setup serves more as a vehicle for a lot of genre action, and an excuse to have the industry's most beautiful stars run around a tropical location in bikinis. The film's production has its own mythology. It was part of a filmmaking blitz that Svetlana and her rotating troupe of performers and crew executed during a single stretch in Hawaii in December 1983. Alongside it, they shot a sequel called The Pink Lagoon. There was also a little bit of Hanky Panky and a release called Panty Raid. The shoots overlapped, performers drifted from one set to the next with barely a costume change, and the locations were repurposed so the 4 distinct narratives could be made. It was such a dense creative period that later the team carved pieces from each movie, tropical sunlight, waterfalls, beach scenes, and the whole deliciously sweaty aesthetic, and reassembled them into a compilation feature called Tropical Nights, turning their Hawaiian experiment into a micro-genre all of its own. And the decision to do so made sense. Hawaii offered beaches that felt cinematic, greenery that required no set dressing, and isolation that made the shipwrecked premise for Surrender in Paradise superficially plausible. But isolation also meant that every logistical challenge, props, weather, and equipment became magnified. It's here where Svetlana's role mattered. She had the reputation of someone who could actually run a set and who could make sure a shoot didn't collapse under the weight of its own ambition. That being said, Surrender in Paradise does open like it genuinely wants to be an adventure movie. There are moments early on when the performances flirt with dramatic tension. There's fear, confusion, and territorial instincts do flare up after the crash. But these are short-lived. Butler leans into his role as the ambiguous outsider, but there is no sense of danger here. The girls seem to ignore his convict backstory and are pretty much enraptured from the off. Ginger Lynn, whose rise in the industry gave every project she touched a boost, plays her scenes with the kind of brightness that made her a star. Donovan and Ayres add electricity to nearly every scene they appear in and are absolutely radiant throughout. The plot, in the traditional sense, dissolves into heat waves, soft focus sunlight, and bodies arranged like tableaus against the beach. What remains is less a narrative and more a mood, one that only could have existed in this thin slice of adult cinema's history. For all its limitations, watching the cast as they explore the island and end up in various situations together is most enjoyable indeed. The cinematography captures all of this with an unpolished charm. The man behind the light meter was Gene Petrov. He favored a soft, diffuse look, and in the Hawaiian sun, it turns the whole film into a strange survival soap opera. Rather than hiding their environment, the filmmakers embraced it, letting nature dictate the visual tone. Even when the framing wobbles or a scene feels too loose, there's an authenticity to it. One complaint I would have about the production, however, would be the soundtrack. All too often, it is guilty of subduing the action. Instead of leaning into the eroticism of a group of castaways stranded on a desert island, Surrender in Paradise slathers the genre scenes in a wash of ambient synth pads and slow, almost lullaby-like electric piano. It's music that feels designed for a late-night massage commercial rather than a tropical survival fantasy, and its overuse drains the tension instead of building it. Moments that should throb with heat or paranoia are instead wrapped in a gentle audio haze. It's a vibe for sure, but not always the one that the movie thinks it's creating. When it hit the VHS market through VCX, Surrender in Paradise carved out a niche. The cover alone, tropical sun, sand, and beautiful women made it stand out in a wall of interchangeable titles. And what survives today is not a polished film nor a lost masterpiece, but something that is still really interesting. A messy, earnest attempt to make erotica exotic in more ways than just the bodies on screen. It was an attempt to use location as more than backdrop to push the genre in a new direction in terms of the exotic escapism it offered. It's the kind of film that could only be made at that time in the industry's history, and that's exactly why it still fascinates anyone who digs into the stranger corners of 1980s adult cinema. Thanks for watching, everyone. I thought after last week's wintry trip into the passions of Carol, I would head somewhere warm and exotic with this review. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.